So yes, it's so good to be back on an IntelliJ IDEA live stream once again. It feels like home. And yes, so today I'm going to talk about developer productivity. Oh, you know what? I've shared my screen, but I have not started the slides. I am a professional, I promise. So today I want to talk about developer productivity with IntelliJ IDEA. One of the nice things about this presentation is I get to talk about two things that really interest me and that I'm very passionate about. One is IntelliJ IDEA, and as Mala mentioned, probably a lot of people on the stream right now are aware that I've spoken a lot about IntelliJ IDEA when I worked for JetBrains. I worked for them for like 7 years. I've done a whole bunch of stuff with IntelliJ IDEA. I know it, I love it, and I'm passionate about helping people get better with it. Now I work for Gradle, and one of the things that we're doing at Gradle is talking a lot about developer productivity. And I realized that one of the reasons I was so passionate about IntelliJ IDEA is because I love the way it enables my productivity as a developer. I love the way it helps me get in the flow and be good at my job. And so that's one of the reasons why I joined Gradle. I get to carry on talking about something I've been talking about for a while, which is how to be productive and what it means to be productive. So in this talk, I get to marry those two things together and talk about developer productivity with IntelliJ IDEA. Now, if you follow me on Twitter, you've probably already seen that there's a lot I would quite like to cover in this talk. I only have an hour. There may be time for questions at the end, or it may be that Malal yanks me off at the end and goes, "That's it, off the stream. That's far too much information." So I'm hoping to kind of cram the most useful tips at the beginning, and then maybe you have to cut me off at the end. So beware. So yes, so I'm Trisha Gee, I work for Gradle, talking about developer productivity with IntelliJ IDEA. We are going to do some live demos, of course, because that's what I do. Let's start simple. Let's start straightforward. You probably have already seen this demo, but let's do it anyway, because it's a good sample of how IntelliJ IDEA helps you create code quickly. We're going to start with a new project. The new project window is like the new project wizard is so streamlined that you hardly have to do anything. I'm going to call this productivity because it's a really easy word to spell. And Java, Gradle, of course, it's a Gradle project. Let's create that. Of course, Mac opens this on the wrong, oh my goodness. Now, live demos, aren't they great? Where's my thing gone? It's gone all over the place. I've lost all of my everythings and I can't get to my top window. And I've got so much to get through and it's just slowing down straight away. Great. So I have a new IntelliJ IDEA project called Productivity. It's right, dock that back in there. Thank you. Straightforward Java project, the way you expect. I am going to create I'm going to create a new class. I'm going to, have I got it on the clipboard? Yes. So create a new class with the package name, and it will create all the right directories for me with the correct package name and the correct class name. I'm going to use live templates to create a new main method. Mala taught me this trick. I used to use public static void main as the live template for this, but she said you can actually just use main, which is easier to type, and then use system out and then type hello, and then use keyboard shortcuts to run that. And then it all runs and it prints out hello. So very quickly, I have a Hello World application with all of the associated directories and so forth. It even created a Git repo for me, so I can actually commit this straight away, call it initial commit, and I'm good to go. So not only have I created a Hello World app, but I've also created a more realistic development environment, if you like, and I can even go straight ahead and share project on GitHub. I'm going to create a repository called Productivity, share that. I hope that I haven't already used that. And there we go. And it's shared, it's available straight away. I'm going to drag that over here. And so IntelliJ IDEA has allowed me to create very quickly a Hello World application, which I can share straight away on GitHub. So it's not just a case of typing hello on the command line, it's a fully working application. So that leads to, sorry, alt-tabbing everywhere. I have so much to get through, which means I can't remember anything. Hello World. Hello World is easy. Hello World has been done 100,000 million times, but it is a demonstration of how to create a bunch of code. And the question is, was I actually productive? Is this what productivity is? Creating, writing lines of code, creating projects, like churning stuff out, like I mentioned in the introduction with Mala. IntelliJ IDEA does have a productivity guide, which you can get to from the help menu. I will add, there's a link at the end of this talk where that link will take you to a page with links to things like the productivity guide and a lot of the features that we talk about. So look for that at the end. The productivity guide will tell you things like code completion has saved you from typing at least 17,000 characters, saving me 141 characters per day, which doesn't sound like very much actually. Quick fixes have saved you from 722 possible bugs since 2021, which has saved me possible 6 bugs a day, which is amazing since A, that's my other laptop that I don't use very often, and B, I'm not a full-time developer. So from these stats, it looks like IntelliJ IDEA is indeed helping me be productive. But you already saw in the last talk, I didn't see the full talk, I must admit, because I was busy prepping. But the big ticket item in 2024 is AI for productivity. So I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't use AI at least a little bit. So let's close this because I do not want this. So let's see if AI will help me to be even more productive. Let's use the AI assistant and say, please, because you want to talk to the robots nicely, write me a Java hello world application with in this package. My code completion, what's it called? Presentation assistant keeps popping over the top, which is not very helpful. So I can even get the AI assistant to generate that whole thing for me instead of having to type the few things I typed. I didn't type very much anyway, did I? Because I typed main and I typed S out. But you could argue that maybe I used even fewer characters to create this. And if we copy it and we compare it with what I did with clipboard, then it's basically the same thing that I wrote. So AI could be a good way to be even more productive by these sorts of measurements of productivity if we're doing simple-ish or straightforward-ish, well-known problem solving like Hello World. I actually did say to it, can you create me the whole project? Can you create me the IntelliJ IDEA project and everything? And it was like, no, 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 I can't do that. But I can give you the steps so that you can do that yourself. So in answer to one of the questions in the previous session, I still think there's probably need for humans at some point in the tool chain. Right. I apologize. I'm talking very quickly because I've got a lot to get through. So you might have to watch this back on YouTube at like half speed later on. It still begs the question of, is this productivity? Is this what we mean when we talk about developer productivity? Mala and I just had a conversation about what is the difference between productivity, burning out, and developer joy. Recently, people have been talking about the SPACE framework, which is one way to look at developer productivity, different facets to measure to figure out overall what developer productivity looks like. And the SPACE framework talks about satisfaction and well-being, performance, by which it means like outcomes, like quality and the impact on users and customers and so forth, activity, communication and collaboration, efficiency and flow. Traditionally, we have measured developer performance probably mostly in this category of activity. By activity, we mean things like lines of code, commits, frequency of commit, time to resolve pull requests, that kind of thing, those sorts of measurements. The reason being that those things are kind of easy to measure. We can measure things like number of bugs fixed. But if it's easy to measure, it's actually also easy to game. And so if we are measured by lines of code, then we will write more lines of code. And if we're measured by number of bugs fixed, well, there's an easy way to increase the number of bugs we fix, which is put more bugs in the first place. So this is not a great way of measuring developer productivity, at least not on its own, which is why Space talks about using some of these other facets as well as activity. Now, As a developer and developer advocate, the areas I'm most interested in are satisfaction and well-being, specifically mine, and communication and collaboration, because the collaboration bit is kind of an interesting in my opinion, underrepresented part of our job. Collaborating with the business, what do you want, which problems are you trying to solve? Collaborating with testers, what is it that I've done wrong, which bugs have I not thought of, which edge cases should I be looking for? So collaborating is, I mean, software is a team sport, and collaboration between developers and between different parts of the organization are what makes great software. And flow. Flow is the thing that really I enjoy as a developer. Being in the state of flow, creating code. That's why I became a programmer in the first place. It's wonderful to sit at the computer, sort of communing with the computer, getting it to do what you tell it to, or when it doesn't do what you tell it to do, fixing that problem and getting that sort of endorphin rush of, hey, I got it to do what I want. In my last presentation at IntelliJ IDEA Conf, I really tried to demo flow in IntelliJ IDEA, and it's just an intrinsically difficult thing to demonstrate because you cannot possibly be in the state of flow whilst you're also presenting to 1,000 people on a live stream on YouTube. It's just physically impossible to do that. So what I want to do for the next 45 minutes of this presentation is to demonstrate cool features in IntelliJ IDEA, like usual. I want you to have a think about how some of those features might relate back to these aspects of satisfaction and collaboration and flow. And yeah, and hopefully also pick up some tips and tricks on how to be more productive using IntelliJ IDEA. The first sort of sets of the first demo I want to go through is writing code. We already looked at Hello World, and Hello World is great and fine and all the rest of it. I want to do a demo which is a bit closer to the way that I actually write code when I'm writing real code. It's still a bit of a noddy example because, you know, it's demo code, which, you know, by its very definition is not complicated or difficult. So let's start by creating a new test. I do like to write my tests first. This is not just a thing that I do in demos to say that everyone should write their tests first. I just find that by writing my test first, I can reason more around what's the behavior I expect to see. But also, I find that IntelliJ IDEA is really helpful for when you write tests first because it helps you to drive out the code that you want to write. So let's write a test. I do not need that. I can use Command N to generate a test method if I want to. I'm not going to do that. I prefer my tests to look a specific shape. So I have a live template for creating my own shape test. So square should have 4 sides. I'm going to create a new square. As you've already seen, the keyboard shortcuts are going to pop up at the bottom. I don't intend to mention every single keyboard shortcut. Alt Enter, she said, mentioning a keyboard shortcut. Alt Enter to create the square class. I will want it to be in the production code route, not in the test route. IntelliJ IDEA does the absolute bare minimum to get my code to compile. I want to assign this to a variable. There are at least 3 different ways of doing this. Pick one. You don't have to do all 3, but I'm going to show you 3. You can use Alt Enter to do introduce local variable. In more recent versions of IntelliJ IDEA, there's now a preview for what this means, which is quite nice because it means that when you click on it, then you know what it is you're going to get. So I could introduce a local variable. Or my personal preference is to extract a variable. It's just something I've been doing since IntelliJ 11 or something, or probably even earlier. And so that's just kind of how I do it. And the other thing, which is a really lovely way of doing it, is postfix completion. So you can type var. I want to talk a little bit about postfix completion. If you press dot, obviously you have access to all the methods on the object. If you scroll up, you can see all of these things with this icon here. And these are like little tiny mini templates that you can use with the code which comes before the dot. So var will create a variable out of the square. But one of the things I use it a lot for is cast, because that does all the messing around, putting parameters in the right places and putting the cursor right back at the beginning where I can cast this thing. I mean, casting is sometimes a sign of a smell, but sometimes it's unavoidable. So postfix completion is lovely, and that's one way of assigning a variable. Now I can see that I like to think in terms of given, when, and then, but this is actually the when. So I'm going to stick that down there. Some of these editor shortcuts like delete line and move line up and down, these are some of my favorite features of IntelliJ IDEA that I miss in pretty much any other piece of software. I write a lot of my prose in IntelliJ IDEA. I wrote the book in here. I write my blog in here. I write Markdown, ASCII doc, plain text stuff because I like these editor shortcuts of being able to move stuff around really easily. So let's delete that. And then I want to assert something. So this is basic completion, which, I mean, I don't need to talk about all this stuff because you use all this stuff all the time anyway. But there's a few tricks I want to show you. So obviously I can select assert equals. That's fine. But I want to show you a trick about, I'm going to use the wrong shortcut now. If you happen to have the cursor in the middle of a method when you invoke basic completion, which I do sometimes if I want to call a slightly different method, or if I'm using an overloaded method, there's a few different ways you can select the method. So if you press enter, which many of us do, that will insert the method where the caret is. But what I might want to do is I might want to overwrite the method, in which case I want to use tab, and that will overwrite the method and put my caret inside the thing. Or what I can also do is, if I'm going to chain the method, I press a full stop or period, and that will insert the method, put a full stop, and then allow you to chain the method on, which is really useful for streams. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. Expected actual, so assert equals 4 and score.getSides. I really like inline hints because it shows me, particularly for assertions, which one is expected and which one is actual. We use Alt-Enter to generate our method here. Alt-Enter gives us 3 different options. The first one is the bare minimum to get the code to compile, which is to create some sort of getSides method inside the square class and return 0. The second one goes, well, you know what? I'm smart enough to know that get is a getter. And so perhaps what you want is a field with a getter and a setter. And the third one is read-only property. So I'll get a field, but only a getter. And that's what I want because that's how I want this to work. So it will create me the field and the getter. And then I want to run the test. I would like the test to fail first because I'm doing red-green refactor. So it does fail. I'm just going to quickly turn this to run the tests using IntelliJ IDEA. I happen to prefer that because you use Gradle to run the tests if you have a big Gradle setup, but I sort of prefer using the IntelliJ IDEA test results if I can, because it's a bit more succinct and it often runs the tests a bit faster. So I have a failing test. What I really need is let's use F2 to ask IntelliJ IDEA, like, what's wrong with this? What's the problem? And it's suggesting that we either need to create a constructor parameter for this or a setter because it's not initialized. And I'm not going to do either of those because it's a square. It's always going to have 4 sides. And then I'm going to rerun my test and it should pass. Yay! And now, because it's gone green, I have the freedom to refactor it the way that I want to. This is sort of suggesting that we assign this here, but we don't do anything with it. We can, if we want to, F2, we can make it final because it can be final, but it's still not being used anywhere else apart from the variable. So apart from the method. So I can inline that and get rid of that if I want to. And it's much simpler. I'm going to rerun my test. Does it still go green? Obviously, this is a straightforward, simple example, but it works the same in complicated code too. And then maybe I'm like, you know what? Magic numbers are not cool. So we should really extract this to a constant and call it number of sides maybe. And make sure that it's private and rerun my test. And it's all fine. So it's a sort of short demo of the IntelliJ IDEA refactorings, how we use them to change our code kind of on the fly, but the code is always compiling. It's always working the way that we want it to. Let's quickly check what else I need to be demoing before we move on. Okay, that is the main thing I wanted to talk about. So the features we've covered are features you're probably all already aware of. So suggestions, basic completion, live templates, new whatever, new class, new method, new whatever. Alt and enter. We used alt enter for code generation from failing code. We also used it for other editor suggestions, including things like introduce variable. And we saw a little bit of the refactoring. Before I move on to the next section, I do want to give a couple more of my favorite tips for working with the editor. One is smart completion and smart. Let's open up another project for this. So smart completion, we were using basic completion for all of that because it gave us all the examples that we wanted. Smart completion takes a look at the type that we've got here and can extrapolate what we need to do from there. So, okay, if I use smart completion or type matching code completion, it will say an array list is the thing which is going to match this type that you've got over here. And the other thing I wanted to show, so I tend to use smart completion quite a lot because it gives me more useful suggestions. And if there's only one suggestion, it puts that straight in there. So I don't have to scroll through finding the right thing. Complete statement I use all the time. Complete statement will close off everything that you have kind of dangling and open. So it closed off my quote, my brackets, my semicolon. I quite often find myself using complete statement even just to put a semicolon on, which might seem like an overuse of a keyboard shortcut, but it's kind of muscle memory. It's so that I don't have to think about what are the specific things I need to finish this statement. I just say complete the statement, and IntelliJ IDEA does it for me. It's super useful for things like you can use it on a for. It will create all the kind of like boilerplate shape around a for, and you can do the same thing for an if as well. So I tend to use complete statement almost everywhere where I think IntelliJ IDEA has a good chance of like guessing at what needs to be in here. It doesn't always work, but it's a good fallback for just making sure it fills out all of the rest of the stuff. I want to have a look at reshaping the code. So I want to look for working code. We saw Alt-Enter for fixing warnings and errors and unused code, but you can also use Alt-Enter for looking for other suggestions for code, which works perfectly fine. It compiles, it's correct, there's nothing wrong with it. But maybe I might look at a for loop like this and go, okay, it's a for loop, I understand it, but is there perhaps a prettier, nicer, more idiomatic or different way of doing it? So I can use Alt-Enter to do things like, well, I can remove the braces, but I don't want to do that. I can collapse it into a for each. And maybe I might prefer that way of doing stuff. I might not, because if I'm using streams, I'm using objects, the performance is different, but semantically, it does the same thing, semantically. Reshape code, join lines. Let's go to multi-caret first. Multi-caret. Multi-caret is one of my favorite features. So I tend to use it by pressing Alt and then Alt a second time and holding it down. Oops, didn't do it fast enough. And then I can move my caret down. I use it a lot for doing things like this. I also use it for moving to the end and doing something on the end. So that's one way of doing multi-caret. The other way is a is a shortcut I don't remember, which is, I think it's Shift and Option, and you could place multiple carets wherever you want them, which can work really well for certain types of files, but is a really good way to break your Java files if that's what you want to do. So that's multi-caret. And the last thing I want to show is join lines, which I use all the time, particularly for prose and text and strings. So you can use that to join it. And of course, you can also, if you just press enter in the middle of a string, IntelliJ IDEA automatically does the right thing with concatenation and so on and so forth. So what I really wanted to do there is just go through what I call a sort of everyday, day-to-day working with code shortcuts and things which help me to be productive as a developer inside IntelliJ IDEA. It's not just about code generation. It's about doing the sort of heavy lifting of the thinking, if you like. So it reduces my cognitive load as a developer to get IntelliJ IDEA to do things like put curly braces in and to just kind of generate these things. So I'm thinking about what it is I really want the code to do, not which character do I need to type right now. When I was asking on Twitter and other social media networks what people liked the most, what made them most productive inside IntelliJ IDEA, a whole bunch of people said the automatic refactorings, which is why I really wanted to particularly showcase those. I can see there's a lot of comments coming up on YouTube. I would love to read them, but I do not have time for that. Hopefully, there'll be time for questions at the end of the session. Now, I hope by now that we all know that we spend more time reading and understanding code than we do writing code. There was a study done years and years ago by, I think it was IBM, which said that even the most effective developers end up writing about 2 lines of code a day. I think it was 10. I need to dig that study out. But we know really that we have to spend a lot of time understanding code before we can write anything. We need to know what the code does before we change it, before we add anything to it. We certainly need to spend a lot of time understanding what's happening if we want to find a bug or find a defect. And you all know this thing about like when you're trying to fix a problem specifically, it could take you like 3 days to identify where the problem is, and the fix is 2 characters. So being able to write code quickly is not the only thing that makes us productive as developers, which is why things like lines of code is not an effective measurement of our productivity. I want to show you how I find IntelliJ IDEA helpful for understanding the code that I'm working with. The first thing I really wanted to look at was navigation. I've always had trouble demoing navigation because I sort of think of it as being a slightly boring set of keyboard shortcuts. But I had a lot of feedback from people saying that the navigation and code navigation is one of the things that makes them most effective in IntelliJ IDEA because they don't read code in some sort of linear way. You don't read code from top to bottom. You read it like, it's a network of, you need to move from thing to thing. You need to understand how the application flows and how the data flows. So in the olden days, when I first started working at JetBrains, I would talk about things like, oh, let's get rid of that. I would talk about things like go to class, go to file. Oh no, that's not right. That's the Windows shortcut. Go to symbol, and we would use those 3 different keyboard shortcuts to do those specific things. Now, you don't have to do any of those things because these days we can just do search everywhere. You press shift twice and you get search everywhere. So if I was going to look for completion, search everywhere will give me classes, it'll give me files and folders, it will give me methods, it will give me settings. If I want, because that's quite a lot of stuff, especially because I'm typing completion, I can tab across to filter by classes, files, symbols, which includes methods, actions, which includes settings, which I can set here. I don't have to open the settings window, and even git commits, which I find really helpful. I can look for a specific commit with a specific word in, or I can do like a full text search, which I think is fairly new because I don't remember demoing that before. So that's kind of the first way to navigate through stuff if we know what it is we're looking for. I also want to, let me just make sure I get all the shortcuts I want to talk about. Right. You'll notice that I don't use editor tabs. So I'm going to use find action, which is not one of the ones I talked about. Tab placement. I have tab placement on none. Lots of people do have the editor tabs open. I don't tend to use that. I tend to use, let's turn that off, tab placement, none. I like to use recent locations. It has all the, recent files. It has all the files that I recently used available right there. And I can just navigate straight to them. It has an advantage over tabs as well. Not only do I not have to use the mouse, but I can also type. So I can look for completion in here, or I can look for caret, whatever it is I'm looking for. The other thing that recent files is really helpful for is I can open up project windows. So you can use the keyboard shortcut for the common ones, like I often use project and commit. But what I use it a lot for is the Gradle window because it doesn't have a keyboard shortcut. So I will quite often just type Gradle and use that to open the Gradle window. There's also, as well as recent files, there's recent locations, which gives you locations inside files. So you can see the top one and the second one and the third one are all multi-caret, and that will take me to a position I was in this file. And that can be a really helpful way to be like, oh, I was rooting around inside this weird method and I know what it looks like, but I don't know which file it was in and I don't know where it is. And I can just go straight back here to the specific place I was looking for. I can filter that by only places where I made edits, which might also be quite helpful. Recent locations, back and forth. You may already have seen me doing this. I tend to navigate with backwards and forwards a lot because when I'm working on code, especially if I'm doing tests, but if I'm working on a number of different classes, I know I've been using the last, it's 3 classes ago, so I'll use backwards and forwards to do that. I also use, okay, so this is one of my favorite things too. Let's look for an interface. I want to, if I have an interface and I click on here, oh, no, that's not the one I wanted. Interface with many implementations. If I click on here, I have multiple implementations of an interface. So when I've got an interface open or an abstract class or some sort of superclass, then I can open that up and see what the implementations are here. I can drill down into that. And then if I see a method here, I can also navigate up to the superclass or to the interface. I can also, let's go down here. I can also use Alt F7 to find out where these things are used. I have always found Alt F7 one of the most useful ways of understanding what on earth is going on in my code, because often you find yourself in some method and it looks suspect, or you want to do something to it, or maybe you think this might be the cause of the bug, but then you're like, I don't know how you get to this method. And I remember in the olden days when I first started programming, back when our IDs were very underpowered, you would basically have to do, a search over the whole code base, a text search to find that method. And now I just use Alt F7 all the time just to go, okay, what's calling this method? Where is it being called from? And usually you get more than one result, I guess. So Alt F7 for that, or I can use Command B to navigate to the declaration. In this case, it takes me to the interface. Often, if I'm calling an interface method, I actually want to go to the implementation. I don't always want to go to the interface. So I use Option Command and B to navigate into the implementation. I think one of the most useful things here is that you see there's more than one implementation. So you're like, oh, well, from here, I'm not actually sure which method is being called. And I can drill in and see what's happening there. So that's the highlights of navigation. Now, navigation isn't the only way that we understand our code, but to me, it's kind of the first step to getting an idea of like, what is the shape of our code? How does it hang together? What's the hierarchy, and how are things called and what's related to each other? But also, we do a lot of reading code. So let's have a look at the tips for reading code productively. We are going to look at, well, the first thing to note is we already talked a bit about inlay hints. I really do like the inlay hints. I find them really quite helpful in terms of, I've worked in a bunch of places where the kind of methods would take a bunch of nulls or IDs like this, and you're like, without the inlay hints, let's turn them off. Do not show hints. Then this method means nothing. You don't know what any of those things are. So the inlay hints are the way of showing you, where did I turn it off? Where are they called? Parameter name hints. I can't remember where it's gone now. But the inlay hints are going to give you a clue as to what's going on here or what is not going on here. They also apply to chained methods. They're very helpful for stream operations, for example. And I quite often format my streams like this so that I can see the types at each different stage. And you can also add code vision for annotating with like the code author and usages, which I think is turned on by default. I tend not to have that turned on because I find it a little bit noisy, but it can be really helpful, especially in large code bases where you don't really know what this method is or where it came from. Pop-up documentation is also a really good way of understanding what's going on, especially if you're using external methods or classes. So you can just, instead of having to drill in or open up in a browser the Java doc for this thing, you just press F1 and it gives you like a nice compact way of showing like, this is what the method is kind of for, this is what it does. You can also use the keyboard shortcut, I can never remember, quick definition, to, instead of having to drill in and look at that method, you can just kind of pop up the definition here so you can see it in the context of the editor itself. One other thing to look at, if we do go into this method, this is array list, so it's part of the Java library, so it's an external library, obviously. External libraries are generally by default shown in reader mode, which means rendering the Java documentation and a bunch of other stuff, which is supposed to make it a lot easier for us to understand this code. I think it's also quite a good way of flagging, this is not my code, this is someone else's code, and so you have no control over this code. If you want to customize what reader mode looks like, you can sort of see that here in editor reader mode, and you can figure out which things you really want on or off. And since we've seen rendered Java doc, we can also have rendered Java doc in our own code, which I quite like because it's much prettier, but it's also more condensed, so it takes up less space. So that can also help us read and understand the code that we're looking at. I found that since the kind of rendered view of Javadoc came into IntelliJ IDEA, I found myself using Javadoc much more often, because when it was like this, it's kind of big and ugly. But when you render it, especially because you can actually control the font size, you can have it looks prettier and it takes up less space, but it's still very helpful. And another tip which I really like for reading code is using the editor fold. Or I'll come to that in a minute, actually. But folding code folding in general. So if I'm trying to understand this class, there's a lot of code in here and it's kind of overwhelming. I can fold away methods so that I don't really, if I'm like, right, I've kind of got the hang of that, the method name is kind of useful, I don't need to care about the internal workings of it. But I can also fold away things like, I'm doing that in the wrong place now. I did that somewhere else before. Doesn't matter. Oh, where did I do that? Customers. There we go. Let's do. If I have something like, if I've got a big method with a lot of things going on in there, I can fold away various code blocks that I don't really care about. Like, that's not relevant to me. I'm just going to fold that away. If there's some code that I want to fold away that I also maybe might want to annotate in a useful way, I can use an editor fold to do that. So I can fold that away and I can say, okay, I tend to do this with private methods. So I'll group together a whole chunk of private methods and fold them away with a description like helper methods. So I know that I just don't care about those. Let me show you how to do that because it's a really helpful trick. So let's delete that. We do surround with an editor fold, give it some description like, I do not care about these methods. Or more helpfully, you might want to do something like, these all relate to customer orders. Oops. And I mean, you can check in these editor fold comments if you want, or you just use them as you're getting to grips with the code, and you can use them to, let's fold it away. It's command and dot to fold it away. And you can imagine just folding away chunks of a big complicated class to be like, right, I've kind of parsed that. I don't need it in front of my face. I'm just going to fold it away so that I can only concentrate on the things I really care about right now. That allows you to focus and stay in the flow. Right, and then I have so much to show and not enough time to show it all. I want to go to language. One of my favorite features, you've probably seen it before, for helping me to understand what's going on with the code is to use language injection. Here, I'm going to inject JSON so that when I look at this, I don't look at this as a string. It is JSON. IntelliJ IDEA, you've now told it this is JSON, and it will also give you not only format it in a way which makes it easier for you to understand, but also give you help. Like if I do invalid JSON, it goes, I think you really wanted to put a comma there. which is really helpful for things like JSON, HTML, so forth. I find it especially helpful for SQL. So I do this a lot for SQL. And so you get formatting, obviously, but you can also optionally point it to a data source, and then you can execute the SQL against a data source. So I don't have to treat my strings as strings. I can treat them as actual language and do helpful stuff with them, like execute them and see if they're part of the problem or not. So that's language injection, and also let's close that. The last thing I want to show is Git history. So Git history. The code is not just what's in the editor. The code is not just text that's shown in the editor. The code is also has a dimension over time. Because often we'll look at code and go, oh my God, who would write it like this? But nobody writes the code like that. The code evolves in that direction. So one of the things that's really helpful to us to understand why the code is the way it is to look at the history. What was changed? Who changed it? When was it changed? And then that can give us some context as to why it looks the way it does. So you can do Git history, but also obviously you can do annotate. It's not so interesting when you're looking at a piece of code that I wrote and I made all the changes to, but if you have a number of different contributors, you can start to ask people, oh, why did you make this change and why does it look this way? So that's a really helpful way of getting some context too. So that's understanding code. Um, Trying to navigate between all the different things I have open. Understanding code. So we looked at navigation, recent files, recent locations, reading mode, quick definition, quick documentation, and code folding. And yeah, a number of people were talking to me about how the code navigation is one of the things that really helps them to understand the code and to be productive in IntelliJ IDEA. I do want to mention just very quickly that if you're interested in the sorts of features that I showed over these last two sections about writing and understanding code, I do have a tiny, tiny course on LeanPub that you could use. If you have a LeanPub subscription, this is free. Otherwise, if you want, you can buy it, no pressure. But all the stuff I talked about and detailed things about, how to use these features are on that course. Right. Let's talk about debugging. Let's talk about debugging. We don't have loads of time, but let's do a quick look at debugging. I'm never quite certain how much to show with debugging because I feel like people either they already know this stuff, in which case it's not very interesting, or they don't know this stuff, in which case you kind of want to spend a lot more time talking about it. So I'm just going to give a really high level view of how I use the debugger. So people who don't understand it can go ahead and find out more. And people who do understand it go, yeah, okay, that's what I do as well. So the debugger, we're going to start. The first thing you need with a debugger is breakpoints. Breakpoints are kind of important. Otherwise, the debugger is not really doing anything. So I'm going to run this in the debugger. It will stop at my first breakpoint. Or not. Did I run it or debug it? I ran it. Ha, there you go. That'll teach you. And so IntelliJ displays inline the kind of in scope stuff. It allows you to click on it. You can drill in. You can see more details. I mean, this is a record, so it's not super exciting. You can create a custom renderer. I love custom renderers. I really do recommend you have a look at them if you haven't. But you probably need to Google that. I've written about them before, so you probably find it somewhere. So you can do that. You can also come in here and do evaluate expressions. So you can do like, you can look for the first name, for example, or what else? Where are we? So have we got a this or in static? No, we're in static, so I don't have one. You can put arbitrary expressions in here and find out what they should look like. So I don't know, person dot whatever. It's not a good example. But when you stopped at a breakpoint, you can poke around and look at the state of your system as it is. You can see here in the variables, and you can see the stack trace. There's not much of a stack here. You can step into, step over, resume program. Step into will, not very surprisingly, step in to the method that the cursor is on. yeah, I'm not going to talk about smart step versus whatever, because that behavior seems to have changed slightly. But anyway, so that will step into the method so you can have a look at what's going on there. If you decide, you can step out, which will run the method and then step out to where it would have normally exited. Or if you decide, oh, no, no, I need to actually go back in time a little bit, you can say reset frame, and that will take you back in time to here before first name was called, which is really helpful if you start going in and go, oh, no, 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 I've missed the point I was interested in. You reset frame. Step over will obviously step over that method, and then resume program will carry on to the next breakpoint. And something else I want to show is evaluate expression, which lets you put in any arbitrary expression. So then you get code completion like usual. So I can run these things and have a look at the status of this. Um, I don't have great examples here, but I can basically run anything in here, not only to have a look at some values. I don't have to run getters. I can run setters. I can create things. I can load stuff in here and like change values. I don't think I can change any of these values because it's immutable. But I could sort of set certain system states if I want in this particular place. So if it's in a state machine, for example, I can sort of set my state to whatever the next state is, carry on running the debugger, and then that kind of allows me to test hypotheses of what the system would behave like if it's in certain states. So that's what I find evaluate expression is really helpful for. And then the other thing I want to talk about is conditional breakpoints. One of the things that drives me crazy when I'm debugging is when a breakpoint keeps firing and firing and firing and firing. I'm like, no, I only want it to fire under these circumstances. So maybe I only want this to fire when Trisha.first name equals Bob, which is like never. But then it's got a question mark on it. Then it will only stop there if that condition is met. And that's a really helpful way of not having breakpoints firing all the time. So that's kind of like the very basic things I wanted to talk about with debugging. We are going to run out of time. So the rest, I'm not going to demo the rest. I'm just going to talk. One of the things I love about the IDE is, an IDE is an integrated development environment. And I think we don't talk very much about the integration side of things. And I think particularly as IntelliJ IDEA users, we take it for granted. Of course, it's integrated with version control. Of course, it has a debugger. Of course, we can run tests. Of course, it's integrated with Gradle or Maven or whatever. But that takes a lot of work on behalf of the people who develop IntelliJ IDEA. This is not something that is, of course. This is part of what makes it very productive for us as developers. The ability to be able to see in the IDE the commits that went into these, the files that went into this commit, or the last 10 commits in the project, that kind of thing. The fact that with the Gradle and Maven integration, and I loved this before I started working for Gradle, the fact that if you have Gradle or Maven enabled, IntelliJ IDEA can now understand much more about your project, what structure is expecting, what the dependencies are, how it should be built, how to run it, that kind of thing. That kind of integration means that I don't have to Alt Tab out and run something else in a terminal. And I don't have to go off like we used to do in the olden days and fetch dependencies and put them in the right place. It's all integrated. It's all part of the same tool. And related to that, the terminal inside IntelliJ IDEA, even though the terminal inside IntelliJ IDEA is the same as the command line terminal for the operating system, I tend to use the terminal in IntelliJ IDEA because I'm not alt tabbing out. I'm not like distracting myself or context switching. Like everything is there inside the same tool. It helps me to stay in the flow. Related, I don't have time to really talk about collaboration, but collaboration being one of the parts of space, I did want to talk about how I use IntelliJ IDEA for collaboration, specifically Code With Me. I do use Code With Me a bunch. I did use it a lot with Helen when we were writing the book together, because we could like call each other, see each other, and work on the code, not the code, the prose, the text together at the same time. I'm a remote worker and I've been remote for over 10 years now. And being able to use things like Code With Me and the other collaboration things inside IntelliJ IDEA, like integrated pull requests, like to some extent the version control, allows me to be part of the team without being physically co-located with them. Oh, I don't have time to show the learning. Oh, this is disappointing. I wanted to mention that IntelliJ IDEA lets me, not just lets me learn, helps me to learn as a developer. The inspections and intentions have taught me more features of Java than reading books about features of Java. I learned about Java 8 streams and lambdas and all those things from IntelliJ IDEA telling me this could be a lambda expression. I learned about records by IntelliJ IDEA saying this is what a record looks like. Only yesterday, when I was running through this demo, did I find out about string templates. I didn't even know that was a thing. So there's a new feature in Java about string templates, and I wanted to show it, but I can't. But it was great. And I'm like, this is cool. It's teaching me stuff I didn't even know I didn't know. And all of that learning is in front of you in the tool that you use all the time to write the code. And it's not just about learning new features of Java. It's about learning more about your code, for example, or learning about, the product you're working with or whatever. So I found it a useful tool for learning and development. To sum it all up, putting everything together, all of these features, the way it's been designed to help me write code, understand code, debug code, run code, build code, helps to keep me in the flow. It helps to get me to that lovely state of flow that we love. And flow feels good. Being in the flow is where we want to be as developers. It's a great state. Flow leads to satisfaction because it feels so good. The Wikipedia definition says, flow is an innately positive experience. It is known to produce intense feelings of enjoyment. Several studies found that flow experiences and positive effect go hand in hand. So as developers, we should be optimizing for flow, not just because, it's good for getting code out, but also because it feels good. And actually, because it feels good, it's good for being productive, it's good for satisfaction, it's good for flow. It adds up to these various different dimensions of the space framework of what it means to be productive as a developer. So to be productive as a developer, it's not just about lines of code. It is about satisfaction, about collaboration, about flow. So I want to leave you with a few thoughts. Oh, yeah. And so I've disrupted myself. I've brought myself out of the flow. So developer productivity is not just about tools. Of course, it's not. Things that contribute to collaboration, flow, satisfaction. It's not just about the tools we use. It's about the people we work with, the processes, the amount of meetings we have to go to, the build times we have, all those kinds of things. But great tools are a part of the developer productivity story. Great tools will help us to be productive, will help us feel satisfied. So I want us to think when we're working, does this tool or process or whatever enable me to be creative and happy? What in my day job is slowing me down? What is adding friction to me being able to actually do my job and get stuff to the end user? And what breaks my flow? Productivity, my productivity as a developer is an investment of both time and money. And so the sort of action I want us to take away is to try and talk to your organization about investing in your productivity. Maybe that's about buying new tools. Maybe it's about buying a better laptop. Maybe it's about giving you time to invest in your own productivity. And your own productivity might be investing time in learning things like learning the tools that you use, learning how to use them better, learning what it is that you don't already know, or I don't know, just spending time not burning out. That might be helpful too. So a lot of the information for this talk is available at this link. I haven't put the slides up yet, but they will be there. And if and when this video is available, that will be there too. So I do recommend keeping a note of that link. It will be evolving over time. Thank you very much.
Am I? Oh, yes, I'm unmute. Thank you so much. Yes, yes, and yes for everything that you said. There were so many comments in the chat, all thanking you, talking about the features that you were showing. But I'm so sorry, I don't have time to go over those questions. Also, Roman from JetBrains, Morit, and a lot of other folks were answering the questions. So we kind of took care of that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, the good thing is that with IntelliJ questions, there's always plenty of people at JetBrains who can answer those questions. I'm sad I didn't get a chance to kind of like engage with everyone, but I just had so much I just wanted to share with everyone.
I know that feeling. It's like you need to kind of give so much out to the developers because you think like, oh no, this one's better than the previous one, but they should know this one and this one too. I absolutely know that feeling. I have one question for you because since you talked about so much, so this is about since you talked so much about the features, is there anything that you think is missing? So it's um,
Oh,
kind
that's a
of an
good
opinion.
question. I really like that question. I I don't have anything that springs to mind right now. I actually have been writing less code since I moved to Gradle than when I was doing a lot of demos with IntelliJ IDEA. So I actually use it a bit less. There's a few things, and it's dumb stuff really, but the ASCII doctor support is excellent. A lot of what I do is writing text, so the ASCII doctor stuff is somewhere where I actually would, and Markdown, would like to see a little bit more support. But I appreciate that that's, especially ASCII doctor, is like, I think that's done on a volunteer basis, so that's like not even anything to do with JetBrains. Um, and so the opposite thing I have really is that every time I open up IntelliJ IDEA and I see new features that I didn't have to research for doing a What's New video, I'm like, oh, this is nice. I never even knew that I needed this. Or as the AI assistant was evolving, I'm like, oh, this is kind of helpful. I can see how I'm going to want to use this in future. So I don't really have anything. I can't identify any major gaps. And I just have to say that the tool just keeps evolving faster than I even knew was possible.
Thank you so much, Trisha. And there are a lot of comments like this, but I don't know where is okay. A lot of comments like this, but I don't have the time to show them all. Thank you so much. It was an amazing session as always, and amazing to have you back. Thank you so much.
Thank you for hosting me. And thank you to everyone who watched.
Thank you. See you. Bye bye.